everyone. I'm Allison Camerata. Welcome to CNN Newsroom.
I'm Victor Blackwell. Good to have you. We begin with the Russia-Ukraine war spilling into NATO territory, killing 2 people in Poland. Now, the investigation into the missile strike continues today. Poland's president says while it appears the missile was clearly Russian-made, the strike was likely an accident caused by Ukrainian air defenses, and adds there are no indications it was an intentional attack.
But Ukraine's president says he has no doubt the missile was not Ukrainian. Last hour, the U.S. Secretary of Defense said the Pentagon has no reason to doubt Poland's preliminary investigation.
We're still gathering information, but we have seen nothing that contradicts President Duda's preliminary assessment that this explosion was most likely the result of a Ukrainian air defense missile that unfortunately landed in Poland. And whatever the final conclusions may be, the world knows that Russia bears ultimate responsibility for this incident.
CNN senior international correspondent Sam Kiley is live in Ukraine there, and CNN Pentagon correspondent Oren Lieberman is live at the Pentagon. Sam, let's start with you. Poland and NATO appear to be on the same page about what they believe happened yesterday based on preliminary reports. But President Zelensky is not. What is he saying?
Well, he's saying essentially that the information he was given by his chief of staff, the head of the armed forces, was different, and he insists that he's always been accurate in the past and he had no reason to doubt that information now. Now, the information he's referring to was perhaps his initial statement yesterday when he said that 2 Russian missiles had penetrated Polish airspace and caused this tragedy. Now, it may be the case that he is going to have to revise his analysis based on what the Poles and what the United States and others are saying. I mean, this ultimately is a Polish decision with the help of their NATO allies to work out who fired the missile that landed and killed 2 of their citizens. The Poles, the Americans, NATO are all saying in one voice that it is Russia that bears ultimate responsibility for this. And I think this just may be a case of the tail catching up with the head in terms of the information cycle, with President Zelensky perhaps trying to justify having been somewhat embarrassed earlier on. There are no indications from any of his other officials that they're out of step really with the Polish findings, all of them pointing again, saying, look, we've got old-fashioned Soviet-era kit here, and inevitably these kinds of tragedies are likely to happen if Russia flies cruise missiles so close to our borders with neighbouring countries, and that is exactly what seems to have happened. Victor Allison, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Oren, how long until the Pentagon thinks they'll know something definitively?
Well, we just heard from Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, as you pointed out, and General Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And it was Milley who said, look, we've got guys on this. There's a team there helping the Poles investigate, and they're looking at all that available information, not only radars and systems on the ground, but also AWACS, airborne detection systems. So he did make it sound like they'll come to a conclusion here fairly quickly. What does that mean? Is that days? Is that weeks? They left that open-ended. They are being very careful here. It wasn't just the Austin comment at the opening that you played where he said we have no information to contradict the Polish president's statement that this looks like it was a Ukrainian air defense missile. Shortly after that, in the first question, no surprise, that immediately came up. And he again said our information supports the Polish conclusion, or at least the Polish preliminary conclusion, that it was a Ukrainian air defense missile. So although it does look like there appears to be some daylight here between the U.S. and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, it was Austin and Milley who quickly pivoted and said, look, this is Russia's fault. It was Russia that was carrying out an attack, and Ukraine has every right to defend itself. This wouldn't have been needed if there wasn't a Russian barrage going out through the sky. Now, one of the things they did talk about was the immediate communication in the wake of the attack. Milley spoke with his Polish counterpart, his Ukrainian counterpart multiple times, he said, and other counterparts. One person he did not speak to, despite trying, was his Russian counterpart. Here's what he had to say.
Some attempts were made, no success with the Russian counterpart. Investigation's ongoing. There's professionals there to do the forensics, all the debris that's in and around the impact site and so on and so forth. And very shortly we'll know all the facts, and we just don't know them right this second.
So Russia did not take the call?
Right. My staff was unsuccessful in getting me linked up with General Garisma. That's correct.
Austin spoke with his Polish counterpart, but there has been no indication he spoke with his Russian counterpart. The U.S. trying to keep very close to Poland, Ukraine, and its allies here.
Okay, Sam Kiley, Oren Lieberman, thank you very much for all the reporting. Let's bring in CNN senior international correspondent Fred Pleitgen. He's live in Moscow for us. So, Fred, that's interesting to hear that the Russians wouldn't take the U.S. call. What's the Kremlin saying about all this?
First of all, it is certainly very interesting that the Russians wouldn't take the call from the U.S. because one of the things that the Kremlin actually said today is they praised President Biden and all that, saying that President Biden had showed a restraint when speaking about that incident that happened there in Poland, not jumping to conclusions. And it really seems as though the Russians are sort of trying to drive a wedge there between the U.S. and some of its key allies, especially between the U.S. and the Poles, because one of the things that we've been hearing throughout this evening and throughout the better part of the day, Alice and Victor, is the Russians really laying into the Polish government. They actually summoned the Polish ambassador here to Moscow. He was only in the Russian Foreign Ministry for about 20 minutes, but the Russians accusing the Poles of what they call hysteria, jumping to conclusions, and the spokesman for the Kremlin also saying that he believed that the Poles should have come out immediately and said that it was in fact a Ukrainian surface-to-air missile that landed there in that Polish village, and obviously killing those people. However, of course, as the U.S. has said, as the U.S.'s allies are saying, they believe that Russia is ultimately responsible. Of course, one of the things that we do see pretty much all the time from the Russians is they're also laying into the Ukrainians as well, essentially trying to accuse the Ukrainian of starting a provocation and trying to drag NATO into some sort of open conflict with the Russians, which obviously potentially would be an extremely dangerous situation. So you certainly have some pretty strong words coming from the Kremlin and coming from the Russian Foreign Ministry and the Russian military as well, guys.
All right, Fred Pleitgen for us there in Moscow. Thank you, Fred.